Jennifer, after 14 years, your financial strategy is outdated, Brian Fields explained, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. We need you gone by tomorrow. I sat across from him in the boardroom of Velthorn Global Headquarters, my hands folded neatly on the polished mahogany table. The Houston skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a view I'd cherished during countless meetings over my tenure as senior financial controller. I understand, I replied evenly, meeting his gaze. Thank you for the opportunity. My calm response clearly confused him. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, as if he'd expected tears or protests. Instead, I gathered my notes, straightened my blazer, and walked out with my head held high. My name is Jennifer McAllister. I'm 52 years old and have dedicated 14 years to managing the financial controls at Velthorn Global, an international logistics company with operations in 37 countries. I've survived 3 CEOs, 2 recessions, and countless reorganizations. I've built systems that saved the company millions and protected it from financial irregularities. And now, I'd just been unceremoniously fired by a man who'd been with our company for less than 3 months. Brian Fields arrived at Velthorn with great fanfare, an Ivy League education, experience at a prestigious consulting firm, and promises of revolutionary financial management. The board was impressed by his flashy presentations and modern approach. What they failed to see was what I noticed immediately: inconsistencies in his claims, vague references to past successes, and an alarming willingness to bend accounting protocols. As I emptied my desk into cardboard boxes, I thought about the meeting I'd had 2 weeks earlier with Elaine Woodward, the head of the audit committee. She'd called me to her office after hours, closed the door, and spoken in hushed tones. Jennifer, we've noticed some unusual patterns in expense reports and contract approvals coming from the new CFO's office, she'd said, sliding a folder across her desk. Nothing concrete yet, but enough to raise concerns. We'd like you to look into it, discreetly. I'd already noticed the discrepancies myself. Large consulting fees to companies I couldn't verify. Travel expenses that didn't match known business trips. Contract terms altered after approval. I'd begun documenting everything, organizing evidence meticulously as was my nature. What Brian didn't realize when he fired me was that I wasn't just some outdated financial controller. I was the person who designed Velthorn's financial control systems. I knew every digital passage, every approval workflow, and every audit trail. More importantly, I knew exactly what I needed to find to expose whatever he was hiding. As I carried my boxes to my car, I wasn't angry. I was determined. Brian Fields had just made the biggest mistake of his career. I've never been one for grand displays of emotion. My father, a mathematics professor, had taught me that logic and evidence always triumph over drama and outbursts. This philosophy had served me well throughout my life, particularly in my finance career where precision and facts were currency. My modest 2-bedroom condo welcomed me as I arrived home earlier than usual. 14 years at Velthorn had allowed me to create a comfortable life, if not extravagant. My retirement fund was solid, my mortgage nearly paid off. I could have simply walked away, found another position, and left Brian Fields to whatever schemes he was orchestrating. But that wasn't who I was. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and settled at my dining table, spreading out the documents I'd been quietly collecting over the past few weeks. Before I'd left the office, I had emailed myself key reports that I knew would be relevant. Nothing confidential. I was too ethical for that. Just the publicly available information that, when placed in the right context, told a damning story. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine. Heard the news. Call me. I dialed her immediately. Jennifer, I'm shocked, she said when she picked up. This came out of nowhere. Not entirely, I replied. Brian's been pushing me out since he arrived. I just didn't expect it to happen quite so abruptly. The timing is suspicious, considering what we discussed, Elaine said carefully. Have you found anything concrete? Not yet, but I'm close. I've identified patterns in the consulting contracts with Meridian Bay Holdings. The company exists on paper, but I can't find any evidence of actual services provided. That's concerning, but not enough for the board to act on, Elaine sighed. Give me 2 weeks, I said. I may no longer have direct access to the systems, but I've built relationships with people who do, and I know exactly what to look for. After we hung up, I spent the evening organizing my approach. I created a detailed timeline of Brian's actions since his arrival, noting coinciding financial activities. I listed key staff members who might provide insights without compromising their positions. I identified external sources that could verify my suspicions. The next morning, instead of heading to the office as I had for 14 years, I set up shop at my dining table. My laptop, notepads, and financial documents spread across the surface. I had contacts throughout the financial industry in Houston, people who respected me and my work. It was time to call in some favors. By noon, I'd spoken with 3 former colleagues who now worked at banks that handled Velthorn's accounts. They couldn't share specifics, but their careful hints confirmed my suspicions. Something wasn't right with the new financial arrangements Brian had established. A week into my investigation, I received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Wright, Velthorn's IT director, rang my doorbell at 8 p.m. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," he said, nervously adjusting his glasses. But I couldn't risk communicating through company channels. I invited him in, offering coffee, which he gratefully accepted. "Things have been strange since you left," Thomas confided, his voice low despite us being alone in my condo. "Brian's brought in a new IT security team. They've modified access protocols to the financial systems. Even I don't have full visibility anymore." "That's unusual," I said, keeping my tone neutral even as alarm bells rang in my mind. "There's more," Thomas continued. "Yesterday, I was asked to retrieve all emails between you and the audit committee dating back 6 months. I had to comply officially, but..." He reached into his messenger bag and handed me a flash drive. "I wanted you to know." This was the setback I'd been anticipating. Brian was covering his tracks, likely having realized the audit committee had concerns. His firing me suddenly made perfect sense. He discovered I was looking into his activities. "Thank you for taking this risk," I told Thomas sincerely. After he left, I plugged in the drive and reviewed its contents. Thomas had included not just the emails Brian was searching for, but also internal system logs showing unusual access patterns. Large financial data transfers were occurring during odd hours, with approval shortcuts I'd never authorized when designing the system. The next morning, I received another blow. My longtime assistant, Vanessa, called in tears. "Jennifer, they're saying terrible things about you," she sobbed. "Brian told the department you were under investigation for financial improprieties before you left, that you were fired for cause." I felt the first genuine anger since my dismissal. Attacking my reputation crossed a line. "What exactly did he say, Vanessa?" "That you'd been manipulating vendor contracts for years, that you'd created a system with backdoors only you understood, that the company might have to restate earnings because of your methods." It was a clever move on Brian's part, discredit me before I could expose him. But he'd made a critical error. By attacking me publicly, he'd given me justification to defend myself publicly. "Vanessa, I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need the current version of the Henderson contract, the one Brian renegotiated last month." "That's above my clearance now," she whispered. "Check the archive system," I suggested. The original should have been logged before changes were made. That afternoon, Vanessa sent me what I needed: evidence that contract terms had been substantially altered after board approval, shifting millions in fees to consulting entities with vague deliverables. Entities I now strongly suspected were connected to Brian himself. I immediately forwarded the evidence to Elaine. Her response was swift. "Come to my home office tonight. Bring everything you have." Elaine's Tudor-style home sat in one of Houston's older, established neighborhoods. Her home office reflected her personality, meticulous, traditional, yet thoroughly modern where it mattered. Multiple monitors displayed financial data, while antique bookshelves lined the walls. "The board is splitting on this issue," she explained as we reviewed my evidence. "Half see Brian as the innovative force Velthorn needs in changing market conditions. The other half has concerns but wants concrete proof before acting against the CEO's hand-picked CFO. This isn't just about innovative versus traditional approaches," I argued, pointing to the contract discrepancies. "These changes weren't approved by the board, but resulted in an additional $2.7 million in consulting fees. The beneficiary companies, Meridian Bay Holdings and Falcrest Advisors, have virtually no online presence or verifiable business activities." Elaine nodded slowly. "It's suspicious, but we need to establish a direct connection to Brian." "I think I know how," I replied, pulling up the corporate registration documents I'd obtained through my industry contacts. Both companies were registered 6 months ago by the same law firm, a firm that also represents Axington Partners. "Brian's former employer," Elaine noted, her eyes narrowing. "Exactly. And if we look at the authorized signatories..." I pulled up another document, highlighting a name. Patricia Fields. "Any relation?" "His wife," I confirmed. "She uses her maiden name professionally, but I found their marriage announcement from 8 years ago." Elaine leaned back in her chair, absorbing the implications. "This is getting serious, Jennifer. We're talking about potential fraud, conflicts of interest, misappropriation of funds." "Which is why he needed me gone," I explained. "As financial controller, I would eventually question these transactions during routine audits. He knew that. But he didn't anticipate that we'd already asked you to look into his activities," Elaine said with the first smile I'd seen from her in weeks. We spent the next 3 hours building a comprehensive case. The pattern was clear. Brian had been systematically directing Velthorn funds to companies connected to himself, disguised as legitimate consulting services. Conservative estimates put the total at nearly $4.5 million in just 3 months. As I drove home that night, I felt cautiously optimistic. The evidence was compelling, but corporate politics were complex. Brian had allies on the board, particularly those who had advocated for his hiring. They wouldn't abandon him easily. My phone rang at 6 a.m. the next morning. It was Vanessa again, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone. "Jennifer, something strange is happening. A team from an outside accounting firm arrived this morning. They're reviewing all financial records from the past 5 years, your entire tenure as controller." My stomach tightened. Brian was escalating his defense by going on the offensive, attempting to find or fabricate evidence of irregularities during my leadership. "Did they say who authorized the audit?" I asked. Brian said it was the board's directive, but... She hesitated. "But what, Vanessa?" "I overheard him on the phone earlier. He said, 'They're not finding anything useful yet, but keep digging. We need something concrete before the emergency board meeting.'" The emergency board meeting could only mean one thing. Elaine had brought our evidence to key board members, and they were taking it seriously. Brian was scrambling to divert attention and discredit me before he lost control of the narrative. "Thank you, Vanessa. Be careful and don't get caught helping me." "I won't," she whispered. Most of us know who the real professional is here. The next 48 hours unfolded like a high-stakes chess match. Brian made his move by calling an impromptu press conference, announcing a modernization of Velthorn's outdated financial systems, and hinting at concerning discoveries about previous practices. Though he never mentioned me by name, the implication was clear to anyone familiar with the company. I watched the live stream from my dining room table, noting how his confidence seemed forced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He was scared. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from former colleagues and industry contacts, many expressing outrage at the thinly veiled accusations. I responded graciously, but said little. This wasn't the time for a public battle. Instead, I focused on strengthening our case. A former classmate who now worked at the Securities and Exchange Commission provided insights, without violating any protocols, about what would constitute definitive evidence of financial misconduct. Armed with this knowledge, I refined my approach, focusing on documenting the money flow from Velthorn to the shell companies and ultimately to Brian. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing Brian's travel expenses, I noticed a pattern of weekend trips to Austin. The company had paid for luxury hotel stays, claiming they were for potential investor meetings. But cross-referencing with Velthorn's investor relations calendar showed no such meetings scheduled. A social media search revealed the missing piece. Patricia Fields had opened an art gallery in Austin 3 months ago. The grand opening photos showed Brian proudly standing beside his wife. On the same weekend, he claimed to be meeting investors at Velthorn's expense. More damning was what I discovered when I dug deeper. The gallery's business filing listed its primary financial backer as Meridian Bay Holdings, the same shell company receiving consulting fees from Velthorn. I immediately sent the evidence to Elaine, who responded with a single line. Emergency board meeting moved up to tomorrow, 9 a.m. That evening, I received another unexpected visitor. Gregory Patel, Velthorn's general counsel, stood at my door looking uncomfortable. "May I come in, Jennifer?" he asked formally. I hesitated. Gregory reported directly to the CEO and had always been politically savvy. His loyalties were unclear. "I understand your concern," he said, noticing my hesitation. "But I'm here on official business. The board has requested your presence at tomorrow's meeting." "Why would the board want me there?" I asked, still not inviting him in. "The audit committee has presented serious allegations. The board wants to hear directly from all parties involved." He handed me an official letter. "This is a formal invitation, not a subpoena, but I strongly advise you to attend." After he left, I called Elaine, who confirmed the invitation was legitimate. "It wasn't my idea," she admitted. "Several board members insisted on hearing your perspective directly. Brian will be there too." "He'll come prepared to discredit me," I said. "Then you'd better be more prepared," she replied simply. I spent the night organizing my evidence into a clear, compelling presentation. I focused on facts, avoiding accusations or emotional appeals. The numbers told the story better than any rhetoric could. As dawn broke, I prepared myself mentally for the confrontation to come. I selected my most professional outfit, a charcoal suit that projected authority without flashiness. I reviewed my notes one final time. When I arrived at Velthorn headquarters, security escorted me up to the executive floor, where I'd spent countless hours over 14 years. The familiar faces I passed regarded me with mixtures of sympathy, curiosity, and in some cases, hope. Standing outside the boardroom doors, I took a deep breath. In a few minutes, I would face the man who had tried to destroy my reputation and career. But unlike Brian Fields, I had truth on my side. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 14 pairs of eyes turned toward me, the 12 board members, Elaine at the head of the table, and Brian, who looked as though he'd aged years in the week since he'd fired me. "Thank you for joining us, Ms. McAllister," said Harold Thompson, the board chairman. "We find ourselves in an unusual situation that requires clarity." I nodded professionally, taking the empty seat directly across from Brian. His attempt at a confident smile faltered as our eyes met. "For those who haven't been briefed fully," Harold continued, "serious allegations have been raised concerning financial irregularities under Mr. Fields' leadership. Countering allegations have been made suggesting these claims are retaliatory on Ms. McAllister's part following her dismissal." Brian leaned forward. "With respect, Chairman, Ms. McAllister's presence here is inappropriate. She's no longer an employee and has shown clear animus toward Ms. McAllister is here at my request," Elaine interrupted firmly. "As head of the audit committee, I commissioned her investigation before her dismissal, not after." I saw several board members exchange surprised glances. Clearly, Brian had been controlling the narrative. "I believe it would be helpful for Ms. McAllister to present her findings directly," Elaine suggested. Harold nodded. "Proceed, Ms. McAllister," I connected my laptop to the presentation system and began methodically laying out the evidence. I showed the contract discrepancies, the shell companies, the money trail to the art gallery, the fraudulent travel expenses. I presented email trails, system logs, and financial transfers. Each slide built upon the previous one, constructing an irrefutable case. In summary, I concluded 30 minutes later, approximately $8 million has been diverted from Velthorn Global to entities connected directly to Mr. Fields or his family members, disguised as legitimate business expenses. The room remained silent for several moments after I finished. Brian's face had drained of color. "These are outrageous accusations," he finally sputtered. "This is clearly a vindictive attempt to—" "Are you denying that Patricia Fields is your wife?" asked one board member. "Or that Meridian Bay Holdings funded her gallery?" asked another. "Or that you charged Velthorn for investor meetings that never occurred?" added a third. Brian's eyes darted around the room, seeking allies and finding none. "These connections are being presented without context. There are legitimate business reasons for—" "I've seen enough," Harold interrupted. "Mr. Fields, please wait outside while the board deliberates." "You can't possibly be taking her word over mine," Brian protested. "She's clearly biased and—" "Outside, Mr. Fields," Harold repeated firmly. "You'll have an opportunity to respond formally through your counsel." After Brian left, Harold turned to me. "Ms. McAllister, thank you for your thorough presentation. The board would also like you to step out while we discuss next steps." I gathered my materials and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Harold spoke again. "One more thing, Ms. McAllister. The methods you used to gather this evidence, would you characterize them as outdated?" A small smile crossed my face. "I prefer the term thorough, Chairman Thompson." Several board members chuckled, breaking the tension in the room. In the hallway, I saw Brian speaking urgently with Gregory Patel. When he noticed me, he broke off mid-sentence, his face contorting with anger. "You think you've won," he hissed, "but this isn't over. I have connections you can't imagine." I replied calmly. "Unfortunately for you, Mr. Fields, I don't rely on imagination. I rely on evidence." The board's deliberation lasted nearly 2 hours. I waited patiently in a small conference room, reviewing emails on my phone. Brian paced the hallway outside, periodically making heated phone calls. Finally, Gregory Patel appeared. "The board would like to see both of you." We returned to the boardroom, where Harold's expression revealed nothing about their decision. "After careful consideration of the evidence," he began, "the board has reached several conclusions. First, there is sufficient cause to terminate Mr. Fields' employment with Velthorn Global, effective immediately." Brian started to protest, but Harold held up his hand. "Second, we have notified appropriate authorities regarding the financial irregularities uncovered. Mr. Fields, I suggest you retain legal counsel promptly." Brian's face flushed deep red. "This is a mistake you'll all regret. I have explanations for everything presented today." "Save them for the investigation," Harold replied coldly. "Security will escort you to clear out your personal belongings." As Brian was led away, Harold turned to me. "Ms. McAllister, the board owes you an apology. Your dismissal was clearly orchestrated to conceal financial misconduct." "Thank you, Chairman," I replied professionally. "Which brings me to our third conclusion," Harold continued. "The board would like to offer you reinstatement to your position with a significant compensation adjustment to reflect both your loyalty and the apparent increased scope of your responsibilities." I hadn't expected this turn of events. I'd been focused on exposing Brian, not on returning to Velthorn. "Additionally," Elaine added, "we'd like to create a new position reporting directly to the Audit Committee, Chief Compliance Officer. You would have independent authority to investigate any financial concerns without interference from executives." The offer was compelling. Increased authority, direct board access, and, reading between the lines, protection from any future executive who might find my methods too rigorous. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. I'd like some time to consider it. Harold nodded. Of course, but I hope you'll agree that Velthorn needs exactly the kind of financial leadership you've demonstrated. Thorough, ethical, and apparently impossible to intimidate. 3 weeks later, I walked back into Velthorn Global as the newly appointed Chief Compliance Officer. My first task was to conduct a comprehensive review of all financial activities during Brian's brief tenure. The damage was extensive but contained. Brian had moved quickly, but not yet implemented his larger schemes. Most of the diverted funds were recoverable through legal action against his shell companies. The press covered Brian's indictment with predictable sensationalism. CFO's modern methods included modern crimes, read one headline. Another proclaimed, Velthorn Compliance Officer uncovers multi-million-dollar fraud. I kept a low profile, focusing on strengthening the company's financial controls rather than publicity. My team expanded to include forensic accountants and compliance specialists who shared my commitment to transparency and accuracy. 6 months later, I received notification that Brian had accepted a plea deal, admitting to wire fraud and embezzlement. He would serve 4 years in federal prison and forfeit all assets connected to the stolen funds. Patricia's gallery was seized and liquidated as part of the settlement. The day the news broke, Elaine stopped by my office. Feeling vindicated? She asked. I never needed vindication, I replied honestly. I just needed the truth to come out. She smiled knowingly. Well, the board is certainly pleased. Your new compliance framework has already prevented 2 significant control issues that could have caused problems down the line. Just doing my job, I said. Your outdated job? She teased. I finally allowed myself a genuine laugh. You know, I've come to appreciate that label. Outdated, methods like cross-verification, documentation, and actually understanding where money goes are apparently radical concepts in some circles. Here's to being outdated, Elaine said, raising an imaginary toast. I prefer classic, I replied with a smile, like fine wine and proper accounting. Looking back on the ordeal now, I realize that Brian's greatest mistake wasn't his fraudulent schemes, or even targeting me specifically. It was failing to understand that in finance, integrity never goes out of style. The methods he dismissed as outdated were precisely what brought him down. As I build Velthorn's new compliance department, I often think about how sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about getting even. It's about proving your value.